and welcome to Yachting Monthly's how-to series, brought to you in association with GJW Direct. I'm Matthew Sheehan, and over the course of 13 episodes we're going to be dealing with some of the key issues when it comes to maintenance and talking to some of the experts to get their tips.
So today we're going to have a look at life jackets and just check what we do with them at the start of the season to make sure they're in really nice condition so that they're there to keep us safe out on the water. The first thing we're going to do is just a nice visual check of the outside of the life jacket. This is fairly self-explanatory, but to start with we're going to have a look at the jacket there and just check there's no obvious signs of wear or chafe or damage to that outer casing. Having checked that that's okay, we're going to turn it over and we're going to do a check of the webbing, the harness. Again, the same thing, make sure that the stitching is in good condition. We're going to run our hands down the various webbing straps and make sure there's no cuts or tears on those. And we're going to check there's just generally no damage or wear or even UV damage that has occurred to the life jacket over its life. Next, we'll move on to the buckle itself. These are generally, but not always, made of metal, so very little that can go wrong with them. But again, it's just checking that the buckle itself is in good condition and hasn't been distorted at all. The webbing is in good condition, the straps are in good condition, and then you should be good to go with that. And then finally, for our outside check, we're going to look at the crotch strap. This is what goes down between your legs and is an essential part of keeping the life jacket close to your body should you ever fall in. The weak link of these crotch straps is the plastic clip on the end of them. These can be quite susceptible to damage if somebody accidentally has trodden on them or they've got caught in a hatch or such like. The plastic arms on either side have to be checked carefully for any signs of cracks or splits. The receptacle has to be checked for any signs of distortion or splits. And then finally, if we're happy with that, we can clunk it together and make sure that it gives a good firm connection. That really is all you need to do for the outside of your life jacket, and then we'll move on to checking the inside of the life jacket. So having checked the outside of the life jacket, next we need to open it up and check the actual bladder itself. Some life jackets will have zips on the bladder. This one just has a Velcro casing. So we'll open that up. And there you can see inside it the yellow high-vis bladder. Now again, the first thing we're going to check here is just a good visual check. Is there any sign of obvious damage to it? There can be mildew or mold that's built up if the life jacket wasn't put away dry and clean. We want to check the reflective tape is attached firmly to it and looks in good condition. And we're going to check the stitching around the edge to check that there's no obvious signs of damage there. Next, we'll have a look to see the various bits of equipment that are attached to it. So here we've got the whistle, that's firmly attached and is good to go should we need it. Now this life jacket doesn't have a light, but that would be one of the issues that we would be checking. Did it have a light? We've got its inflation tube over here that we'll be using shortly. And then finally, we're looking at the actual gas cylinder itself and the inflation mechanism. Now, when we're looking at these all vary slightly. This is an automatic inflator. So we have two aspects to it. First, we have the salt crystal element at the bottom there. All important here is to look for the green tab. If that is in place, it shows you that this mechanism hasn't been used to date and is good to go. These mechanisms work very simply by when they become immersed in salt water, they dissolve and allow the hammer mechanism to operate and pierce the gas cylinder itself. This one looks in good order. We also have the manual mechanism on the bottom of the cylinder. Should for any reason the automatic inflator not have worked, this takes a sharp tug and that again will fire the mechanism. Again, the green tab shows us that this manual inflator hasn't been used. It's there in place. They are easy to come off, as you can see there, and that shows us that this should be good to go. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to unscrew the cylinder itself. The cylinders are fairly susceptible to corrosion. They sit often in a wet, damp environment. So we're looking at the outside of the cylinder. Is that in good condition? We're looking at the threads on the end of the cylinder. And perhaps most importantly of all, we're looking at the end cap of the cylinder to see has it been used at all. Because whilst the firing mechanism might have been used, the cylinder might have been. This cylinder is clearly in good condition, threads are good, it hasn't been used, so it's good to screw back into the mechanism as and when we need it. Having done the visual inspection of the life jacket, the next thing we need to do is inflate the life jacket to make sure that the bladder is airtight. The way to do this is simply take off the cap from the inflation tube, and then it's a matter of having a good pair of lungs, giving the good blow, and getting that life jacket fully inflated.
Hasn't been used for a while.
Great, good inflation. So we've got a good life jacket here, nicely inflated. The only thing to do now is to leave it and wait. Some people might want to do a bubble test over it, but ultimately the test that we use at Rubicon 3 is to leave this for a good 12 or 24 hours, and it should maintain its level of inflation. There should be no leakage from it at all. So we're going to leave that overnight now, and in the morning we'll come down, check that it's just as firm as it was, and that's the best possible check that you can have that the life jacket bladder is intact and in good condition. So when you are inflating these life jackets, a nice thing to do if you can is to use an airbed pump or similar foot pump. The reason for that is you're then pumping in much drier air than comes from your lungs. The inside of these bladders often have a talc coating in them to help keep them dry, and the more moisture that we can get out of them, the better, or keep out of them. The same goes for when you're deflating it. If possible, use an airbed pump or similar to deflate it, and that gets all of the air out rather than leaving any moisture in there. If you do for any reason find that your mechanism needs to be replaced or your life jacket rearmed, it's very important that you only use the cylinder and the mechanism shown on the life jacket itself. In this instance, we're looking at a Seago 38 gram CO2 rearming kit. You just need to go and speak to your local chandlery or supplier, and they will make sure you get the right rearming kit. And when you do take off the cylinder, it can just be worthwhile just to check on the cylinder itself. They'll always be stamped on there just to make sure it is the right cylinder. Obviously, when you buy a new one from the pack, that'll come nicely marked on the packaging itself. So having left the life jacket overnight, we're pretty comfortable that the bladder's in really good condition. So now it's a matter of deflating and repacking. So the first thing to do is just using the end of the inflation tube, we push the valve to one side, and that will gradually let the air out. The trick with this is you need to get all the air out of the life jacket. So be patient with it, give it a squeeze, and wait till it's fully empty. When we are deflating, good practice is to use the little node on the end of the cap there to push the valve to one side, as that both allows the air out but stops the possibility of any foreign objects being introduced from the end of your hand or your glove. Okay, so our life jacket's now nicely deflated, and now it's a matter of rearming it and repacking it ready for our season of sailing. So the first thing to do is to put the gas cylinder back through the pocket and screw it back into the arming mechanism itself. You may find that your life jacket has a slightly different system, but basically the process is exactly the same for everyone. You need to make sure that's nice and firmly in, but don't try to over tighten it, as it is possible to damage the threads. Through the course of the season, you are going to want to make sure that that hasn't loosened itself. through movement outside of the life jacket, it is quite easy for those cylinders to loosen. So that's something to keep a fairly regular check on. The next thing we're going to do is screw back on the automatic trigger. Again, making sure it's nice and tight, but no need to over tighten it and risk damaging the threads. And finally, before we repack it, we're going to want to make sure that the manual arming toggle is left outside of the bladder so it's easily accessible when it comes to be needed. Okay, so if we are rearming it, the new arming firing mechanism will have come with one of these green clips here, and we can just push that back into place once we've screwed in the arming mechanism, and that shows anyone who's looking at it that this mechanism is ready to fire. How you repack your life jacket is different from each model, and it's very important that you have looked at and read the instructions for your particular model. There can be little intricacies that are unique to that design that you may not be immediately aware of. It can be a good idea if you have any concerns about the life jacket, or if it has been some time since it was seen by a professional, to have it professionally serviced. Inside every life jacket will be one of these tags, and that will show you usually when it was bought, the life jacket serial number, and when, if ever, it was last professionally serviced. Having done all the visual checks now, we can start to repack the life jacket. So on this one, it's a nice simple Velcro fold up process. On some life jackets, you have a zip around the edge, and on those ones, you must be careful as you close the zip to make sure that the yellow bladder doesn't get caught into the zip mechanism, which is all too easy to do. As we fold it up, we're going to make sure that the lifting strop, as happened on this one, was kept outside the bladder so that when the life jacket inflates, it's readily accessible for use. So we're going to look at a slightly different life jacket now. This is an old Crusader 190, and there are going to be some key differences that we see here. So first and foremost, it's got a zip mechanism to keep the bladder in. As we unpack it, we'll see its other different features. The zip is something that when you're servicing, or not servicing, but looking after these life jackets, you want to also give some care to as well. So a little bit of silicone spray or similar will keep the zip in nice condition. You'll also see this is a much more complicated life jacket to pack away. So we strongly advocate, as well as having its actual instructions with you, take some photographs before you unpack it and as you unpack it, and it will just help you remember exactly how this life jacket packs away. So some key differences from the other life jacket that we've seen. We've got the light, which we would strongly recommend you have on your life jacket, because should you fall in at night time, this is going to be a key feature for being able to be found by the rest of your crew. If your life jacket does have a light on it, it's important to test that the light is still working. Again, there are different ways to test these depending on the model. This one has a simple on and off push switch. Other ones will have a long lead with two elements on the end of them, which you can just touch into water, and that will activate the light. This light works nicely, and we're happy with that. Here we've got the same whistle and the same tube as before, the inflation tube, but the next difference to this life jacket is that it has a spray hood. A fairly old and mouldy one, this one we would definitely look to check or maybe even change before we used it. And you can see there are some splits in it as well, so an old test life jacket. We would strongly recommend that your life jacket has a spray hood on it. Should you fall into the water in any sort of sea state, there's a great deal of water in the air. And the spray hood is all important to be pulled over your face to keep your air dry, because there have been a number of incidents of people still drowning whilst kept afloat by their life jacket. So for us, an essential piece of kit to any life jacket that we use. You can see also this bladder is much bigger than the previous life jacket. Once it unfolds, it comes considerably past the outer casing, but the firing mechanism itself is very similar, with a manual toggle and an automatic salt inflation crystal into the cylinder. We thought we'd show you how one of these salt activators work. There's a small crystal in there which, when it gets soaked in water, releases the firing pin into the gas canister, which allows the life jacket to inflate. But rather than take our word for it, let's see one in action. There it is. So we can now see where the pins fired through into the mechanism, and you can see that the green tab itself has fired off as well, letting us know that this mechanism is no longer fit for service. So here we can see in the salt activator that the red panel has now moved, and that has pushed up the yellow mechanism there, which has pushed the pin up from the other side into the soft patch on the gas bottle. Okay, so finally, before we pack it away, one thing to check is that the crotch strap is done up and is not dangling loose. We talked at the start of these about how important it is that the mechanism isn't broken, and the only real way to ensure it isn't broken is to keep it done up. The crotch strap should always be done up, except for the moment when you're putting the life jacket on or taking it off. And finally, having made sure your life jacket is in this good condition, do make sure you hang it up, both for storage and during the season on the boat, somewhere that's warm and dry. There's no point in having checked your life jacket only to allow mildew and damp to get into it and reduce its effectiveness. So, and then when you store it on the boat, make sure you're storing it somewhere sensible, not cramming it into a locker or a small compartment. There's lots of plastic parts on these life jackets, and any sort of crush pressure on them is going to damage them. You need to be storing your life jacket in a good, safe place and remembering its value to you to look after it. So here we're going to see the manual activation of the life jacket. Make sure the red toggle's good to go and give it a good firm tug. Nicely inflated. You can see the tube is there ready for a top up if it's needed. And most importantly of all is the red lifting strop is easily accessible. That's why it's important that it's packed in the correct manner so that it comes out on top of the bladder, not below it. So now we're going to inflate another life jacket, but this time open to begin with, just so we can watch it inflate. See a slightly different bladder on this one. Now what's important is that Ian can find his spray hood from behind him. These can be quite tricky to reach sometimes, especially in the water. You need to pull it right over your face, and then there will be 1 or 2 Velcro straps which will attach over the end of the bladder. We strongly recommend that if you have a spray hood, you have practiced inflating it and practiced putting on your spray hood before you fall into the water. These are not easy things to do for the first time with many life jackets. So that really summarises the things you need to be doing for your life jacket at the start of the season, or during the season if you think anything might have happened to your life jacket. It doesn't take long. It's a matter of doing some simple visual checks to the casing, to the bladder and to the firing mechanism. The only thing you need a bit of time on is once you've inflated it, leave it overnight for those 12 hours to check that nothing deflates. Pack it away carefully and you should be good to go for a great season of sailing.
Well, thanks for watching. I hope that was of help. Make sure that you like us, make sure that you subscribe to us, and stay in touch for the next episode.